Hey guys, it's Classic Sonic here, and today I'm with Modern Amy. Say hi.
Hi.
And today we're going to be reacting to I Woke Up to Emergency Alert on My Phone, Creepypasta Story Time. And this is the complete version, and we're not going to be listening to the full complete version because it's going to be a lot of editing, but if we make it that far, then fine. I'm okay with it, I guess. So, I'm going to start the video in a minute, but right now I have to turn down my TV because I don't want Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog interrupting our video.
Yeah.
Whoa. Okay. Start.
I woke up to an emergency alert at 6 a.m. this morning on my phone. Checking my phone, the alert read, "Go indoors immediately and remain inside. Await further instructions."
I mean, it seems like a reasonable time to wake up for adults.
After living here for almost 10 years, I've only ever received a handful of emergency alerts, which all presented themselves as tests for the emergency alert system. Generally, I live my life pretty freely and I don't take life too seriously.
My school used to do that.
Unfortunately for me, this means I'm not the type of person who prepares for the worst to happen, which I now realize is what I should have been doing. I thought to myself, better safe than sorry. So after getting out of bed, I immediately headed downstairs and checked that both the front and back doors were locked and deadbolted. I always lock my doors at night, but I needed to verify this simply for sanity's sake. Even if I didn't know exactly what was going on, I live in a decently sized 2-story house that I've worked my ass off to make a reality. The windows downstairs all had solid security screens on them, meaning there was no need for me to check the locks on them. After securing the house, I went upstairs to my bedroom and tried to make a couple of calls. Initially, I called my boss. I couldn't just expect to get the day off work without explaining the situation, if there even was a situation. The phone rang for some time before directing me to a voicemail system. I left a message explaining the emergency alert that I received and told her to call me back when she gets the voicemail, or at least the chance to discuss what happened. I tried calling my parents, but again, I was sent straight to their voicemail system. I think at this point is when I start to get worried. My parents live almost 2 hours away from me, and they're always awake at the ass crack of dawn. They never left the house before 8 a.m., but I still tried to convince myself that they were busy with something else. So again, I left a message for them and told them to get back to me when they could. My phone dinged. A message from one of my colleagues at work, John. He was asking whether I'd received the emergency alert too, and if I knew anything about why it was sent out. I replied immediately and told him I didn't know any more than he did, but I'll let him know if I find anything out. I needed to calm down now. There's no use worrying over something yet that I didn't even know about. I decided to shower first before having a quick breakfast and turning on the television to get my mind off whatever could be going on. At this point, it was about 7:30 a.m., the time I'd usually be leaving for work. I'm not one to purposely ignore warning signs, so I'd rather get an angry text from my boss than get caught up in whatever causes the emergency alert to be sent out in the first place. When I turned the television on, the same emergency alert sound invaded my ears. The volume was so high from the music that I was listening to the night before that I had to dive for the remote to turn it down.
I know.
The same words that my phone woke me up to were now the only words on the screen. Go indoors immediately and remain inside. Await further instructions. And now I was extremely worried. I was realizing this couldn't be an accident or a test. I'd never seen any emergency warnings like this, let alone it being presented on every channel that I flicked through. Without any additional information, there was no way for me to know what was going on or how to prepare for it. So after turning the volume from the television all the way down to get a break from that blaring alert sound, I realized how quiet it was outside. No cars commuting, birds chirping, neighbors chatting, any airplanes flying overhead. Nothing. I never realized how accustomed I'd become to those background sounds. This lack of background sound made me feel incredibly uneasy, like I could sense something was wrong regardless of the emergency alerts. All of my blinds were still shut, so I hadn't had a chance or even thought about looking outside until this point. There wasn't any specific instructions regarding looking outside anyway, so I didn't really think anything of it, but I thought that it would be safest to look outside my bedroom window, which leads out to the small balcony through a sliding glass door.
I'll be put out of the sliding glass door.
I went into my room and I pulled on the string that rotates the vertical blinds, and immediately my room flooded with natural light and the warmth of the sun that hit me. So I'd always loved the warmth of direct sunlight, so I made sure that my windows faced towards the sunrise, and subsequently towards the street. However, after opening the blinds, what I saw made me immediately drop to the floor.
What?
Out of sight from the street. I barely got a glimpse of them, but they looked extremely hostile. These creatures, they were nothing like any animal I'd ever seen. They were gathered in a circle in front of the house across from mine. It looked like there were about 8 of them. They were gaunt and tall, and appeared as though they were wearing a suit of skin that was far too tight for their bodies. Their bones seemed to be almost protruding from their skin. They had no facial features, besides a pair of dark, sunken eyes that appeared completely white in contrast with their extremely dark skin. These things were far from human, but were standing on 2 legs like us. I'm glad that they didn't see me. If they can see it all, that is. I don't think I'd be writing this right now if they had seen me. After dropping to the floor, I immediately closed the blinds again. I'd never had a panic attack before now, but now, realizing the actual danger I was in, it sure felt like I was going through something similar. Nothing that was going on was normal. Without confidence, I dialed the emergency telephone number on my phone, and immediately a recorded message sounded through my speaker. Go indoors immediately and remain inside. Await further instructions. Go indoors immediately and remain inside. Await further instructions.
Okay.
This message pierced my ears and continued looping until I ended the call. A couple of hours passed by. I went through my entire phone list, trying to get into contact with anyone I possibly could. Not even John wouldn't respond. Not a single person answered their phone or responded to the frantic voicemails that I left. At the moment, I was safe in my house, but how long? How long would that last? I didn't even know what these creatures were, let alone what they were capable of. I just knew that they weren't here to make friends.
Go outside and test it out.
Eventually, I decided to make my way downstairs to take stock of the food that I had. I don't know how long I had to wait these creatures out, but the power was still working at the moment, so everything in the fridge and the freezers was still okay. The water was still running, obviously, since I was able to take a shower. But again, I didn't know how long that would last. I decided to fill up the bathtub and the downstairs bathroom in case the water stops running anytime soon, so at least I'd have maybe 150 liters of drinkable water in that case. Curiosity got the better of me. See, after taking stock of the food, filling up the tub, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was already going a little mad. Just yesterday, everything had been completely fine. And now I couldn't get in touch with a single person, and there were creatures outside on the street that I'd never seen before. I needed to look again. I needed to know that what I saw was real, and not something that I'd made up in my head. This all felt like a weird dream that I needed to wake up from. But I knew this was real.
Don't we all wish?
I went back upstairs to my bedroom and I peeked through the blinds. Surprisingly, the creatures were no longer where I had seen them earlier. And I noticed the door to the house across the street looked like it had been scratched through. There were these long scratch marks along the length of the wooden doors and a large hole in the center. They'd broken their way into that house, but they were no longer anywhere to be seen. That is until I noticed something staring straight back at me through the upstairs window of that same house. The deep, sunken eyes I stared into seemed like they'd be able to steal the soul from my body if I looked for too long, and after my brain recognized what I was staring at, I leapt backwards away from the blinds. That thing had no doubt seen me, and I paced back and forth, thinking of what I should do at this point when I heard a horrendous sound coming from downstairs, and I quietly made my way down the stairs towards the sound. The sound pierced my ears. It sounded like something sharp being dragged across metal. And that's what I realized they were trying to get inside. The metal security screen door that I installed was being barraged by them. I started moving the bookcases that I had by the entrance against the front door, and now the sun was setting. And they were mercilessly going at it. There's no way I could fend off those things barehanded. That's when I remembered the gift my dad gave me for my 25th birthday. See, I was never really into guns. Never really had a need for one, but at that time, A time like this, it was quite necessary, if it had to come to that. I ran back upstairs into the guest room where I'd stored everything that was gifted to me for my birthday this year, and the pistol was in its case. I removed it, I loaded it with the ammunition that my dad had shown me how to use. So I'd never fired a gun.
Just do it.
So this still remains as a last resort.
Just do it.
And now I'm sitting in my room, recording this, the pistol sitting on my bedside table, and I can still hear those creatures downstairs.
Shoot those.
I don't know exactly what I should do. Should I run?
Exactly.
Should I fight?
Yes, do it.
If you're hearing this,
Do it.
please respond.
I responded to you. I said do it.
So it's been a couple of days since my last post. A lot has happened. On a positive note, I'm not dead yet. However, I'm in a new predicament now. So yeah,
This is part 2, by the way. They just went on to part 2. I think he did post them separately somewhere, but I just like watching kind of complete parts for some reason. I don't know why. It just gives me more of the, oh, this is that, and you know.
Yeah.
I had to post this as a record of what's happened here. I'll start from where I left off in my previous post. That hideous sound from the front door downstairs didn't let up. I needed to decide whether I'd find somewhere safe to hide within the house or make a run for it while those creatures were preoccupied at the door. Both of those options had downsides. See, if I decided to stay in the house and hide, I'd find myself trapped should they find me. If I decided to run, there's no way of knowing how well they are at tracking or even how many more of them there are outside. I also have no experience shooting a gun, so I felt as though an enclosed environment would give me the best chance of landing a shot should it come to that. But then again, there's no telling whether a bullet would stop them or not. I do have an attic that I hoped would be difficult to reach by those creatures. The opening is in the second bedroom and requires a ladder to get up. Fortunately, I painted that room earlier in the year and borrowed a ladder from my father, which I forgot to return to him. With this plan in my head, I decided to put it into action. I needed to gather food and water before going up there, but I didn't know how much time I had left before they broke through the door and a makeshift barricade. Well, the bottom of the stairs are right by the front door, so if I couldn't get back to the stairs in time, I'd be dead for sure. I grabbed the pistol that had been sitting beside me and bolted downstairs, and then I realized these creatures weren't just bombarding the front door. See, the sound of metal scraping on metal came from windows too. Never had I ever been so thankful that I had security screens, ones that were installed into the windows, but I couldn't imagine they would hold up for much longer. I had no time to screw around. With haste, I headed toward the kitchen. A lot of food was still on the counter from when I was taking stock. I grabbed a couple of shopping bags from the pantry. I scooped whatever I could from the counter, and I filled up the bags, not forgetting to grab a can opener. I grabbed it, too, from the utensil drawer. I predicted all the food that would last me about 2 weeks if I stretched it out, but I didn't have time to gather everything, and I wouldn't be able to make a second trip down here anytime soon. Water was more important anyway. See, without water, I wouldn't last a week. The only thing I could think of was to fill the water bottles I had and hope that they would last me until these creatures moved on. So I rummaged through the cupboards and I found 4 different water bottles of varying sizes. I filled them up at the tap as fast as I could before throwing them in bags with the food. These bags were pretty heavy now. See, I placed the pistol in my waistband and I lifted the bags, running towards the staircase. A loud crash came from the kitchen window behind me. Not like what I'd already been hearing. It sounded like one of them had gotten through the security screen. I didn't have time to look back, and honestly, I was too scared to. Hoping I'd make it in time, I dashed up the stairs as fast as I could, and I ran for the spare bedroom. I slammed the door behind me and quickly locked it. Knowing full well that a thin bedroom door wouldn't stop these things, I dropped the bags, and I grabbed the ladder that was lying on the ground. Lining it up with the attic opening, I climbed up and I moved the panel covering the opening. More loud crashes and heavy footsteps on the wooden floors could be heard from downstairs. There wasn't much time left. I grabbed the bags and lifted them into the attic with all the strength I could muster. And this is when I realized I left my phone in my bedroom. I felt like I needed it in case anybody tried to contact me, but I clearly wasn't in the right state of mind at the time. Without even thinking, I climbed down the ladder away from the safest place that I could hope to be right now, and I swung the door open, about to bolt for my bedroom, stupidly thinking I still had time to spare. The figure I saw at the bottom of the staircase stunned me, and I froze for a second. My mind told me to scream, but it was like I was paralyzed. Nothing came out of my mouth. Its eyes stared wide, The same eyes that I had stared into from the window across the street, and suddenly the figure lunged towards me up the stairs. I snapped out of it. I ran backwards into the spare bedroom, and I slammed the door closed again. The creature made contact with the door, and a loud thump resounded in my ears from the impact. I pounced at the ladder, and I scurried up through the opening. I didn't know how smart they are, but my mind told me I needed to pull the ladder up, or they'd definitely know that I was up here. I leaned over the opening, I reached for the ladder, I grabbed it firmly, I heaved upwards and backwards. This ladder wasn't light, but the adrenaline coursing through my veins must have helped as I pulled it up into the attic. Vicious scratching sounds came from the bedroom door, and just as I placed the panel over the opening, the sound of the door being caved in boomed. I held my breath and I closed my eyes in the dark. I could hear the creature below me scurrying around, destroying everything in the room. It would have torn me apart if it had caught me, I'm sure of that. Soon I could hear the other creatures making their way up the staircase and into the bedroom, too. The fact that they had no vocal sound unsettled me, like a silent serial killer with a mask, but I'm not sure I'd rather be listening to whatever visceral sounds they would make if they had mouths. The only thing I could do from here on out was wait. Wait until they settled down or lost interest and kept as quiet as possible. I didn't move an inch for a few hours. Continued listening to the rampage happening below me. I had no way of knowing how good their hearing was, and I was in no rush to find out. I silently prayed that my phone would survive the ordeal so I wouldn't be completely isolated if there were a chance of contacting someone, and internally reprimanded myself for being stupid enough to forget it. I had no way of knowing what time it was exactly, but a glimpse of sunlight shone through the small window in the attic, signifying dawn was upon us. I had survived the night, and for that I was thankful. I could still hear faint sounds coming from the house below, but the rampage had subsided for the most part. As quiet as I could, I grabbed a snack bar out of one of the bags. I drank from one of the bottles I had filled, only now realizing how thirsty I was when the lukewarm water that I'd usually only drink ice cold met my lips. I gulped down half the bottle before I could stop myself. I didn't want to risk going down anytime soon, so I stayed up in the attic for the entire day. I actually felt relatively safe. I assumed they didn't know I was up here, since I'm sure they would have joined me by now if they did. But I couldn't stay up here forever. I still needed to get my phone, for obvious reasons. If it hadn't been destroyed yet, that is. I eventually passed out from exhaustion, I think, since I don't remember purposely laying my head down to rest. Despite waking up knowing that time had definitely passed and having my bladder screaming at me for release. Though there obviously isn't a toilet in the attic, so I'll spare you the details. Needless to say, I remained as quiet as possible. Eventually I realized I could no longer hear any sound coming from the house below. But getting down and back up again wouldn't be a walk in the park, since I'd need to use the ladder again, and staying anywhere else in the house clearly wasn't safe. What I could only guess was the state of the windows and doors being in shambles. Luckily, though, if the phone had survived, it would only be in the next room over where I'd left it. I decided to wait a few more hours before executing the retrieve and retreat again plan. Slowly, I removed the panel from the attic opening and quietly surveyed the spare room below. Everything looked to have been torn to shreds, and I can only imagine what would have happened had I taken just a few moments too long to get up into the attic. Plus, the room was a mess. There was no sign of the creatures in direct vicinity. I poked my head out further, and I peeked towards the bedroom door. Well, what was left of it, at least. Again, no sign of them. Still, I couldn't hear a thing from downstairs, so I quietly moved the ladder and lowered it down slowly. I made sure to hold the pistol tight while climbing down the ladder as light-footed as I could, and made my way to the doorway. The bottom of the stairs looked clear too, but I wasn't going to risk going down there right now. I crept towards the open doorway that was once my bedroom door, and I surveyed the room silently, trying to locate my phone. My bed had been turned upwards, and my clothes from the closet that had been hanging neatly were now strewn across the floor with plenty of ferocious slashes through them. Finally, I located my phone. It seemed odd that it was sitting so perfectly on top of my favorite jacket, but I grabbed it, turned it towards the doorway, and that's when I saw the creature rise onto two legs through my balcony window.
No, run.
Like it had been waiting for me in a crouched position. And once again, the creature stared at me for a moment with its deep, sunken, white eyes, but without thinking, I aimed the pistol at the creature and I pulled the trigger. The sound of the glass shattering made a deafening sound, and I fell backwards. I didn't know if I'd hit the creature or not, but I needed to get back to the attic now if I had any chance of getting out of there unscathed. The sound of the gun would surely alert others. I knew this, so I immediately got to my feet and I started back towards the attic opening. I glanced at where the creature had been a second ago, but it wasn't there anymore. Assuming I'd hit it, I made my way back to the spare room and hurried up the ladder with my phone in my back pocket. The sound of the creatures galloping up the stairs surprised me, and I glanced toward the staircase for the open doorway. They saw me this time. I hurtled back up into the attic and kicked the ladder out from under myself. I quickly moved the panel back over the opening and threw the heavy bags on top of it, hoping to weigh it down. Immediately, the pounding began. Pulling my phone out of my back pocket, I unlocked the screen. Another emergency alert flashed on the screen. It said, "Seek nearest bomb shelter immediately. Saturation bombing inbound ETA. 1500, 3 p.m." The clock on my phone showed the time as 12:30 p.m. If you're reading this now, please respond. Reading the emergency alert on my phone, my heart...
Before we get into part 3, what do you have to say about parts 1 and 2 so far?
Creepy as fuck, but this is good.
Yeah. Not so bad.
Yeah.
But honestly, I'm starting to think it's like that creature from that's been a myth ever since like 2015, 2016 possibly, and it's a creature where he's white and he has glowy eyes and he walks on all fours like a dog.
Oh, yeah.
I forgot what his name is, but I'll probably put a picture up on the screen of him later or something. I don't know, because I don't remember his name, so I don't think I can look him up.
Yeah.
Alright, part 3.
Thank. I just had 2.5 hours to make it to the nearest bomb shelter. Those creatures relentlessly pounding on the attic access panel and only the small attic window as an escape option. My chances of making a safe escape stood at almost 0%, but I wasn't about to give up. The nearest bomb shelter I knew of was nowhere near where I lived. Though I knowing how many of those creatures were roaming around outside, I wouldn't stand a chance of making it there on foot. I'd need a car. But my car is in the garage and my keys are, well, they were, in a bowl where I'd leave them by the front door. It'd be far too risky to go back into the house if I managed to escape, as I'm sure I would need time to find them considering the state of just my bedroom, and the time is something that I don't have a lot of.
True.
Thinking through the different scenarios in my head, immediately I remembered one of my neighbors, Craig, stopping me on a morning run a while back and telling me about how he preps for the end of the world. Something I definitely thought he was crazy for at the time, and forgot about almost completely not long after he told me. I never thought anything like this would ever happen. He told me that he had a bunker installed under his house about a year ago with enough food to last a family of 4 for a year, despite him living alone. His house is a couple down from mine, but I never actually saw anything being installed. At this point, though, this was the only chance that I had to make it somewhere survivable before the bombs hit. I needed to get to his place as soon as possible, and I had only one option of getting out of the attic. Immediately, I made my way over to the attic window. It was small, but slid open in its entirety from the bottom, so I guess I would manage to squeeze out. Luckily, I never had security bars installed on it. I needed to do this without alerting any of those creatures if they were still any outside of the house. Whether they could climb or scale the house or not, I prayed for the latter. I popped the window open slightly and peeked out. The window faced towards the neighbor's house, and in the same direction I needed to go. The way the house was designed meant that I could lower myself onto the roof of the lower level of the house once I got outside and not have to drop all the way to the ground. Probably seriously injure myself in the process. From the window, I couldn't immediately see any of the creatures in the vicinity. I forced the window open as far as it could go and propped a leg up and out. Once one of my legs were out, I hunched down and moved the rest of my body through the opening, following my other leg. Holding onto the windowsill, I faced the wall and lowered myself slowly till my feet met the roof on the lower floor. The roof tiling was solid. I didn't trust myself enough to not slip and fall off, so I lowered my body onto all fours and I crouched down. From here, I could definitely be seen from the street whether I was crouching or not, so I immediately moved forward towards the back of the house. I guessed that it would be a lot more likely that there would be more of those creatures on the street rather than in my backyard. I was right. I scanned the backyard from my vantage point and didn't see any of the creatures. However, I could still hear the creatures pounding on the attic panel, which would likely attract more of those things if they were attracted to the sounds. This also meant those ones were still preoccupied, and I still had time before they figured out that I wasn't up there anymore. I carefully made my way towards the gutter pipe, which traversed the length of the house from top to bottom, and made one final scan before lowering myself onto it. Sliding down the pipe, I tried my best to stay quiet. However, the worst thing that could possibly happen at that point occurred. The fixture that secured the pipe onto the wall came loose. As the screws tore from the wall, the pipe came along with me and came crashing down onto the concrete pavement. Slamming into the ground, the air immediately left my lungs. I tried breathing in again, but I couldn't. I knew I had no time to mess around, and those creatures would have likely heard the commotion. I managed my way to my feet and forced myself towards the side of the house, away from the back door. At this point, my breath came back to me, but the pain in my back ached immensely, and I collapsed against the house. That fall definitely left a mark, and if this were any other time, I would probably have laid down and called for help. But help wasn't coming. I realized the poundings out in the attic I was hearing had stopped, and my heart sunk once more. They were coming. I picked myself up again and started moving. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins, and knew a wasted second could be the difference between surviving this ordeal and being torn apart in a few moments. I needed to stay out of sight, so my first instinct was to scale the fence in front of me. The pain in my back throbbed, but my will to live grew stronger. I jumped up and grabbed a hold of the top of the fence, holding on tightly. Pulling myself up, I thanked myself for working out regularly, which granted me increased upper body strength. I propped my leg up onto the fence and worked to pull the rest of my body up and over. My way down on the other side, however, was far from graceful. As I pulled my body over the fence, my descent was halted by my shoe getting caught in the loose screw protruding from the top of the fence. Tugging on my shoe, it came loose from the nail. I fell onto a bush directly below me on the other side. While my descent wasn't graceful, it also wasn't too loud. However, this was no time to be hopeful, and I immediately brought myself to my feet and moved towards my next-door neighbor's house. It was probably safer to move between backyards and scaling fences than it was to expose myself to the street, where other creatures likely lay waiting. Craig's house was just the next door over, so I wasn't far now. I could hear creatures scurrying around in my backyard behind the fence that I had to climb. They weren't smashing through the fence or jumping over it yet, so I thanked my lucky stars. I didn't know the family who lived directly next to me, but the state of the house left little to the imagination about their fate. The house had the same security features as mine, from what I could see. But most of the back windows were broken, and the screen door looked like it had been completely torn open like mine. But the house stood silent right now. I moved towards the fence on the opposite side of the yard, the one that they shared with Craig, and quickly peeked over, after scanning down the side of the house, for any of the creatures. The coast was clear, but a wave of despair rushed over me when I saw that Craig's house, too, had taken a beating. It seemed like no house on my street had been left untouched by this point, and I was just one of the lucky ones who was targeted last. Without knowing the full behavior of these creatures, there could very well be one of them still lurking inside his house. It also dawned on me that it was likely Craig had already entered and sealed the bunker that he had built for exactly this type of scenario. Whether or not this was the case, it was still my last hope. I'd rather die trying than die doing nothing at all. Whilst his house was beaten like the others on the street, Craig's yard was clear. I made my way over the fence like I had the other, but this time being more careful not to get snagged. I stayed low to the fence, not wanting the creatures in my yard or anywhere else to catch a glimpse of me, and landed safely on the other side with a quiet thud on the bare dirt. The house was about the same size as mine, but I'd never actually been inside, so the location of Craig's bunker was still to be determined. The upside of his house already being invaded meant that I wouldn't have to do any breaking and entering myself. Just entering. The back door had been torn completely off its hinges and lay on the ground outside the entrance. I moved towards the house and listened carefully for any sounds inside. The only sound I could hear was a banging from the direction of my house. That's when I realized. It sounded like the creatures were pounding on the fence I had first scaled. I didn't know what caused them to come in this direction, maybe just dumb luck, but I knew that it wouldn't be long before they made their way towards me. I moved the handgun from my belt and I raised it in front of me before moving swiftly into the open doorway with light footsteps, avoiding making unnecessary sounds that would likely be heard from anyone or anything that remained inside. My plan was to look for a basement. Yes, this was the most likely place. A hidden bunker would be situated inside a house. The back door entry led directly into a laundry area, where shattered glass was strewn across the floor. Directly connected to this was the kitchen, which I scoped out carefully before entering. The glass on the floor made me very cautious of where I placed my foot. The large pieces of glass would likely not be quiet if shattered further. A loud sound bellowed from outside, making my heart skip a beat. It sounded as if the fence had been bowled over and hit the ground. I had no time to waste if they were getting closer already. I quickly moved through the kitchen and made my way into an open living room. The furniture had been completely torn apart. The floor was littered with bits and pieces of wood, glass, and other miscellaneous materials. A number of doors led out of this room, any of which could be hiding a way down. However, a door on the corner had clearly been torn through, leaving a large creature-sized gap in its wake. I made this assumption that this was likely where Craig had fled to, which hopefully meant this was the way down to a basement of some sort. More cautiously than ever, I walked towards the battered door, and as I entered the room, the lack of light caused my eyes to readjust. A staircase leading down was the first sign that I had been right. I stood silently for a while, while my eyes slowly adjusted themselves to the darkness. There was no use going down into a basement that I couldn't see a thing in. When I could make out the bottom of the staircase, I carefully moved down. But when I was halfway down the staircase, I saw it. Human remains covered the floor. Blood splatters covered the walls and the ceiling. A large pool of blood was situated in the corner of the room where Craig's mangled body laid. Huge pieces of flesh had been torn out.
Ew.
My stomach turned and I doubled over, dropping my gun and forcefully expelling the small amount of food that I had consumed earlier. The sight was horrific. I couldn't believe that I had actually seen something so graphic. The world around me went mute for a moment as I processed the situation, but a deafening bang came from above me and snapped me out of my daze. The sight of Craig's body had narrowed my vision, but what appeared to be a solid metal door that was slightly ajar came into view, near where his body remained. He was just a little too late. I sprinted towards the door and I slammed my body into it, opening it wide enough to fit through. Something clattered down the stairs behind me, and I glanced back, and once again I saw that gross creature, its large eyes staring deep into my soul. It was coming towards me faster than I had imagined, and my gun remained at the bottom of the staircase where I had so foolishly dropped it. Without thinking, I heaved the door closed with all of my strength, and I spun the handle. The sound of the creature slamming into the door could be heard as the metal bolts locked the door in place. It's been a...
This feels like a type of movie where it's like a zombie apocalypse, but at the same time, it's not 100% like that. Instead, it's like different creatures.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's not giving our... I don't think did he ever give us the detail of... when he... about the creatures and if they walked on all fours or not?
Mm-mm.
He probably didn't. I don't remember though, honestly. He might have not.
Who knows?
Should we do one more?
I don't know.
Let's do one. Let's do this final part, and then we'll give you guys the final part. The final parts next time, because it looks like we have 24 minutes left of this. So if we just have 10 more minutes left of this, then we should be good. So next one.
I heard the bombs drop about an hour after my last post. The bunker shook so hard I thought that it was going to collapse on me. But after the last explosion, the walls and the ceiling remained solid without Craig and his prepper tendencies. I wouldn't be alive right now. I didn't know him too well. But I can't let his death be in vain. When I first got in here, the creatures continued pounding on the door relentlessly, but to my relief, none of them had managed to make their way into the bunker before I did.
Good.
After the final bomb dropped, the outside world went silent. From inside the bunker, it seemed like the creatures hadn't even made a dent in the thick metal door that separated me from them.
Yep.
After hours of listening for any activities outside the door, I collapsed onto the bed. Craig had installed a single cot, which wasn't particularly comfortable, but with a sense of a seemingly safe environment to lay down in, and the fact that it was a hell of a lot more comfortable than the wooden floor in the attic, I managed to fall asleep. I had vivid nightmares of the creatures that night, and I woke up in a cold sweat. I opened my eyes and I was looking directly up at the ceiling. I tried to lift my head, but something stopped me. My body was stiff. It rejected every signal I gave it to move. It felt heavy. Like gravity had increased tenfold, and I was stuck.
Honestly, it sounds like he's a little lower this time.
And that's when I noticed in the corner of my eye the dark figure that stood in the opposite corner of the room. Its shadow cast by the small battery-operated light in the wall next to me. I struggled to make out who or what it was that had found its way into the safe place I thought I had secured. The figure started moving towards me, and my heart skipped a beat.
No.
The figure's face became illuminated by the light, and its
away.
huge, sunken eyes stared
Go
back
away,
into mine.
figure. No.
I wanted to
Wherever
scream.
you are, go away.
I wanted to jump out of the bed I was helplessly lying in and do something about the situation I'd found myself in, but the closer the creature got to me, the less control I felt I had over my own body. Its tall form reached higher than most professional basketball players, with its head nearly touching the bunker's relatively low ceiling. At this range, I could make out more details about the creatures, tightly bound to its thin body. The creature's dark skin appeared charred. Its large eyes remained the only recognizable characteristic on its face. Its long, sharp finger, like claws, taunted me. The creature arched its head down towards me, and its face grew closer to mine. It felt as though the creature was sucking the soul from my body. The sheer terror I felt and the malicious force this creature exuded forced me to squeeze my eyes closed and wait for the inevitable to occur. But nothing happened. Moments passed, and I waited, and still nothing. I opened my eyes again, and the creature was gone. I tried to get off the bed, and my body finally responded. The weight that held me down had suddenly lifted. Completely shaken, I examined the place the creature had been before I closed my eyes, and I found no trace. It had vanished. Or maybe it was never there in the first place. But it felt so real. I'd never experienced sleep paralysis before, but those creatures, they had an unimaginable effect on my psyche, it seemed.
It was right. That's what it was.
I couldn't continue sleeping after that ordeal. I got up completely,
In my head, and I wanna
made the
say
bed,
that
and decided to
out
take an
loud.
inventory of what Craig had bought for this place. He wasn't lying about the amount of food that he had stockpiled. While it wasn't anything fancy or particularly tasty, it got the job done. And, beggars can't be choosers. A huge water tank had been installed in the bunker, which was completely full of portable water. The lights in the bunker were powered by rechargeable batteries, and Craig had obviously wanted this place to go dark because there was enough here to last a lifetime. I estimated that if I rationed correctly, I could live for at least a year. I didn't really have a clue on what to expect about the size and contents of the bunker before getting there. All that mattered before was getting to the bunker in one piece. Literally. The size of the bunker was adequate for a single person, about 4 by 4 meters, consisting of a single living space with everything needed for long-term survival located in the one room. From the bunker door located in the center of the south wall, the bed I slept on prior was situated in the adjacent right corner of the room. The toilet was located in the opposite corner, adjacent to the north and east walls, along with all the miscellaneous medical supplies. In the far left corner, adjacent to the north and west walls, was the large water tank, and next to it was where Craig had stored the food supplies in countless numbers of large, sturdy containers, ones that towered over me. Additionally, the clothes located in the other corner, adjacent to the south and west walls, were my size, so it meant that I wouldn't need to sit and bathe in my own filth while seeking refuge here. Fortunately, Craig was obviously a meticulous prepper, as almost every container and compartment was labeled with exactly what was in content. After moving a few of the containers that lined the walls, to my surprise, I stumbled upon one labeled weaponry. I didn't know what to expect inside, but I prayed there would be something that could replace the pistol I so stupidly dropped at the bottom of the basement stairs before coming in here. Carefully lifting the lid, the contents of the container revealed itself to me. Inside lay the pistol. It appeared to be a similar model to the one I'd lost, but guns were, and definitely still aren't, my forte. A box full of ammunition was positioned next to the gun, in addition to a decently sized sheathed hunting knife. I picked up the knife and removed it from its sheath. The sharp blade looked brand new and was about 6 inches long. Not that it would be much use against the creatures anyway. I'd be torn apart before I could even get close enough to land a hit with it. But regardless, it was better than no melee weapon at all. I definitely thought I had the mental ability to stay isolated for a long period of time, but after a single day, I felt like those creatures were going to get into my head. I mean, humans were social creatures, and I'm afraid I'll go crazy in here alone, especially considering what I saw when I woke up. I'd physically be safe here, but staying here alone for a long period of time seemed to be just as bad as facing the new reality that was outside. If I can't even go a single night without seeing those creatures, the bunker would be the end of me, and my mental health, if I wasn't careful. It was hard to tell what was going on outside the safety of the bunker. Not only could I not hear anything, I also had no signal on my phone since entering, and Craig obviously didn't plan on contacting the outside world when shit hit the fan, because I wasn't able to find any form of radio that would work in a place like this. However, it was important for me to find out the fate of everyone else. I couldn't be the only survivor. It was almost as if something was compelling me to leave the bunker. The dreams and the visions I had led me to believe that something didn't want me to stay in the shelter and safety of the security bunker. I convinced myself that I could always return here if necessary, but getting to a bunker where there are other people and a community to develop would be an ideal situation. I decided to wait over a week before making this decision. The days in the bunker dragged on, and without a sense of day and night, I constantly felt like I was on the edge of going crazy. An irrational fear grew inside me. The nightmares and visions of the creatures became worse, but always ended before they offed me for real. Something wasn't right here. I was itching to get out. If the creatures were waiting for me outside the bunker door, I would be torn apart in moments, but I had to believe that the bombs that were deployed wiped a large portion of them out. I mean, however many there were to begin with. Regardless, I needed to know, and I had a firearm once again to back me up. I found a high-quality bug-out bag already pre-packed with essential equipment during my stay here, which included a portable water filter and canteen, fire starters, medical gear, a change of clothes, a few MREs, a torch, navigational tools, a multi-tool, and a tarp. Needless to say, this made the choice of what to bring with me a lot easier. Additionally, despite the hunting knife I found earlier being a seemingly useless weapon against these creatures, it proved some peace of mind for whatever reason. I decided to carry it along too, as well as the pistol and ammunition found with it. I was as prepared as I would ever be. And whether I stayed in the bunker or not, my fate would likely remain the same if those creatures still remained outside. If they survived those bombs, how the hell am I supposed to do the job? The plan was to get out of the bunker safely, find a form of transport, get to the nearest communal bomb shelter where I could likely find any remaining survivors. When it's safe, I would come back and take all the supplies from the bunker. With a backpack on my back, a stomach full of as much food and water as I could fit, and a pistol in front of me, ready to fire at anything that moved when I opened the door, I turned the handle and heard the bolts release. My nerves began to kick in. But what waited ahead of me, I needed to discover. Pulling the door, it creaked open, and a cold draft hit me. Opening it further, I inspected the room, which was dark, but seemed empty. I guessed it was still dawn outside, and I looked at my phone to check the time. It buzzed in my hand, and the vibration startled me. It was another emergency alert. The emergency alert that appeared on my phone's screen read, "The creatures have been eradicated. Any remaining survivors should seek aid at the nearest communal bomb shelter." My mind eased as I read the words. It seemed as though the bombs had actually worked, and from where I stood, the coast was clear. I looked back at the bunker, and my mind went back to the things that I had seen during my stay in there. There's no way I could live the rest of my life in there. The only thing left for me to do would be to obey the message. The nearest communal bomb shelter was located relatively far from my current location, and the trek on foot would be far from ideal. I needed to find a working vehicle that had not been affected by the bombs or some other means of transportation. However, if the alert was true, walking would definitely be a possibility. I stepped out of the bunker and the cool morning air hit me again. I guess the Craig's house above me no longer stood in its entirety, otherwise I would not have been feeling a gust of wind in his basement. The gun I had dropped before entering the bunker, that had landed on the ground at the bottom of the staircase, was no longer anywhere to be seen. The weirdest part about the situation, though, is that Craig's body was missing too. The pool of blood where he had been lying remained. What was left of him had been moved elsewhere. It simply vanished. It was exceptionally weird that the gun and Craig's body would be missing. But these creatures had used a bait trick on me once before, so I decided it'd be better to forget about the gun and solely rely on the one that I had obtained in the bunker, if I happened to still need it. Regardless, I didn't want to stay by the door of the bunker for much longer, and I couldn't only rely on the correctness of what the emergency alert had told me. There was no telling whether the creatures had silently returned, or remained here for some time since the bombs had dropped if they were actually still alive and lurking. I moved towards the staircase, which seemed to be unharmed by the bombs. The entire basement seemed completely intact, for that matter. At the top of the stairs, the door that had once been there was no longer, and the morning light shone through. I slowly began climbing the staircase, waiting for the moment where a lurking creature would pounce on me and end my life. But as I reached the top and peeked out over the doorway, not a single sound could be heard. The house around me was in shambles. The ceiling and the walls had been severely damaged, leaving only a skeleton of what this place once was behind. But without a creature in sight, now was a better time to move than ever. I slowly moved towards what was once a perfectly intact window, but now just a frame which faced the street. Through the window I could see that it was not only Craig's house that had been severely damaged, but every other house within my line of sight, and all the surrounding foliage, was in a similar state. Anything that could survive the impact of the bombs that were dropped would have to have been superhuman. There's no way any normal living being could come out of something like that unscathed. At this point I realized the likelihood of me finding a functioning vehicle near my location would be next to none, and without the keys to a random person's car that was safely tucked away in the garage, it would be useless. To get there by foot, it would take at least an hour, maybe even 2, depending on the speed that I would be traveling. I needed to have faith that there really was no creatures remaining on the surface, or I wouldn't last very long in the outside world. My only other option was returning to the bunker, which would cause me to spiral further into losing my mind, and there's no way I'd be doing that if there was hope that other survivors waited for me. Human company is what I so desperately needed. Without much of a second thought, I decided to cautiously leave the remains of what was once Craig's house and head in the direction of the communal bomb shelter where I pleaded only survivors would meet me. Human survivors, that is. The sound of birds chirping and the other background noise that we got so accustomed to was eerily absent, and the charred buildings and foliage gave the neighborhood a mute tone. I thought about humming to myself while walking to my destination, but the thought of a lone remaining creature hearing me from somewhere it had been hiding during the bombs forced me to keep my mouth closed and travel with a light step.
Yeah, it's better that way.
Moving towards the shelter, I kept a firm grip on my gun and remained on high alert, cautiously scanning my surroundings. I prayed not to see a creature peer from a broken window or around the corner, and that I would never have the misfortune of looking one of those creatures in the eye again. The eyes of those creatures had been scarred into the back of my mind. I thought back to the first time I had locked eyes with them through my neighbor's window. Even the image in my head caused me to feel extreme paranoia, almost as though I was being watched from afar or stalked. But there was no obvious signs that this was actually the case. About 3/4 of the way to the shelter, I began letting my guard down. I had almost completely convinced myself that there was truly no creatures remaining here, because I surely would have run into one by this point if the alert had been deceptive or inaccurate. I felt safe, for the most part, and holstered the gun that I had been holding in my waistband to rest my arm. I glanced behind me as a simple precaution, and what met my gaze sent a shiver down my spine. A dark figure moving swiftly behind a fence a few hundred meters down the street from the direction I had come. My heart skipped a beat. There was no doubt in my mind that the figure I had just seen was one of the creatures. I froze for a moment and kept my eyes on where I had seen the creature disappear. A few moments passed, and I tried to convince myself that my mind had simply been playing tricks on me. Had I actually seen that creature, or was it just something my mind had created out of paranoia? Moments later, however, the creature's face peeked from the fence it had disappeared behind, and its eyes locked with mine, like I was hoping would never happen again. My mind suddenly flooded with images of the creatures, and the image of Craig's mangled body appeared in front of me. Screaming in horror, I broke my gaze from the creature's huge, deep, sunken white eyes and swiftly turned around towards the shelter. There was no longer any doubt in my mind that I was being followed, and without looking back, I began sprinting towards the shelter, faster than I'd ever run before. I couldn't hear anything behind me, but I had no desire to look back and experience what those creatures had just done to me once again, or even slow down for a second. Continuously, I braced myself for a swift slash from behind that would end my life, but was yet to come. My gun was once again grasped tightly in my hand, not wanting to drop my weapon for a second. Sprinting had closed the gap between me and the shelter. I turned onto the street which it was located on, and now only a few hundred meters of open street stood between me and my new safe haven. The large yellow sign that declared the purpose of the building I was heading towards came into view, but I then realized that the doors to the shelter were closed, and there was not a single person waiting for me outside. I had no other option but to pray that there was someone on the other side willing to open the door for me. A gut feeling took over me, convincing me that the creature was right behind me, ready to mangle my body like what it had done to Craig and compel me to turn around and look. I turned around while still moving towards the shelter door, and to my bewilderment, the coast was clear. I stopped dead in my tracks for a moment, truly debating whether or not I had already gone mad. There was no way what I had seen wasn't real. I couldn't believe that. I turned again back towards the shelter and noticed the door was open and that a man stood just outside of the shelter and was waving me over. The man yelled at the top of his lungs for me to run. Swiftly, I checked behind me again, and what I saw made me feel as though I was going to have a heart attack right then and there. A huge horde of those creatures charged in my direction, quickly closing the gap between me and them. Purposefully, I avoided looking at their faces, and without a second thought, turned on my heels and raced towards the door. The man swiftly moved back into the shelter, and for a second, I thought that he would close the door before I made it inside, but to my relief, he kept it open. A moment after I stepped inside the shelter, the man slammed the door shut behind me for a huge thud to the other side, and caused it to open again slightly. A barrage of loud thuds came from the other side of the door, and I slammed my body up against it, trying to close it again, far enough to lock it in place. Just then, a huge effort from the creatures was made, and the door swung completely open, sending me tumbling down a staircase, adrenaline rushing through my body, and the pain from falling down the stairs was masked by the fear that these creatures had just breached the door to the shelter. I looked up the staircase that I had just descended, and to my dismay, I saw the creatures violently tearing apart the man's body who had helped me a moment ago. All of the hope I once had was lost at this point, but I struggled to my feet, and I jolted towards a door that appeared to separate the entrance from the main living area. Tumbling through the door, I was shocked to see dozens of other people crowded on the other side of the room. Some of these people were trembling on the ground, others were yelling complete gibberish, and I quickly turned back around and slammed the door closed. This door was not one that could take much of a beating, but I believed that any time I bought could help me. Without thinking, I started dragging any furniture that wasn't bolted down in front of the door, trying to form some sort of barricade to slow the creatures down. A young girl's voice screamed from somewhere behind me, asking me where her dad was, and I could only assume that her dad was the man who I had just seen die right in front of my eyes. I started yelling for people to help me, and the creatures were going to get in here if we didn't move fast enough. And not a single person moved from where they were. Another loud voice bellowed from behind me, a woman this time, blaming me for dooming them all and damning me to hell. A sudden rush of realization hit me, and I understood exactly why this had happened. Those things waited for me to come out of Craig's bunker. They wanted me to lead them to the other survivors, and that's why they'd been stalking me on my way here. They were not allowing me any other option but to get to where I now was. But the emergency alert I received, Was that another one of those creatures' mind tricks too? Like what I thought I'd seen while seeking refuge in the bunker. Was that really sleep paralysis or something more sinister? It was clear that the answer to these questions would remain unanswered. After piling up what I could in front of the door, I moved backwards towards the other side of the room. The people behind me continued yelling at me while I looked around for any other way out of the situation. Swiftly, I spotted a door to my left that had been left slightly ajar, and I ran towards it, hoping for something that was never going to happen. And as I swung the door open, I realized it was only a small storage area. A loud bang came from behind me, and I turned around. The furniture that I had stacked up in front of the door had been sent flying across the room, and without thinking, I moved quickly to the storage area that I'd come upon. Screams from the other side of the door bellowed throughout the enclosed area and were soon replaced by the sounds of flesh being torn apart.
I don't like that.
The storage area I'm in now has no alternate exits. No way out. It won't be long until these creatures find me in here, and there's no way I have enough bullets to even cause a dent in the numbers they have. This is almost definitely to be my last update. And the solace I have now is the fact that I'll be saving a bullet for myself. For anyone else who receives the emergency alert that I did, I'll pray for you. Good luck. And goodbye. Hey there kids, it's me, Mr. Creepypasta, and I wanted to say thank you for watching tonight's video. And also, I feel like this is something that really needs to be said. I'm pretty sure all of you are hearing this far too many times from far too many places, but during the current COVID-19 crisis that's going on, make sure that you're practicing safe hygiene. Wash your hands, don't touch your face, don't lick random strangers on the street. I know that there's a lot of memes going around about it, but the biggest note is that although it may not be deadly for everyone, keeping it contained reduces the risk of death to everyone. So, important. Also, a number of conventions are currently closing around the United States. If there's a convention near you that I was intending to appear at, if there's an announcement of any kind of closures, I'll be sure to let all of you know on Twitter and the community page, so make sure you're following me there to get any information about that. And also, if you look in the description down below, you're going to find a group of my friends that are artists that make their living at events and conventions such as this. So I know all of them would appreciate any kind of support that you could show, especially if you feel like you're missing out on some of their artwork from missing out at these cons. So take a look there, see if there's anything you like. I know a lot of them work on creepypasta stuff, horror movie stuff, and generally anime and comic books that at least I love, so I hope that you do as well. And a very special thank you to everybody on that Patreon, patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, especially Ariel Torres, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Ken Lando Higuchi, Brianna Ventine Jensen, Chumpinski, The Red Oak Shield Virus, Sandy Barney, Asia, G. Weevil 3, Diana Kraus, Stephen Van Huss, Tristan Pelton, Nico Kyle, The Ginger Bros, Dante Rao, Rafael Rodriguez, Don Mulemeister, Eliminator 86, Steampunk Sinner, Caleb Dougal, Sky Harbor, The Homeless Bird 93, Gabrielle Undefined, Bobby Carmen, Liam Newman, Aaron Stormcrow, Bobby Jean Torgan, Dr. Strawberry, The Wormhole, Barbara Macedo, and Vic. Thank you guys so much, and if anyone would like to join them on that list, head over to patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. Here's hoping that you guys are loving the horror as much as I am. And sweet dreams.
Okay. You can go ahead and give your opinions first on this whole story, apparently, because we finished it all. Okay. But overall, I'll give that's pretty good. Jimmy did really good on it, I would supposedly say. So yeah guys, that's it. Bye.